What would you do if you lost everything? Your sight, your family, your dreams, your very reason to live. And then 30 years later, in the most unexpected moment, found it all again in a single song. Can a melody bring back the dead? Can 88 ivory keys reunite a family torn apart for 3 decades? Can music heard only in darkness shine brighter than any light? One blind man's trembling fingers on ancient piano keys would answer all these questions on an autumn night in Memphis, Tennessee. The concert hall was packed that evening. The Memphis Music Masters Competition had drawn the city's elite music lovers from across the South, and a panel of 5 distinguished judges whose combined expertise represented over a century of musical achievement. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across mahogany walls. The grand Steinway on stage gleamed under spotlights, its polished surface reflecting the anticipation in the room. 12 finalists had already performed. Prodigies from Juilliard, conservatory graduates with perfect technique, young virtuosos who'd trained their entire lives for moments like this. And then the announcer called a name that made people glance at their programs in confusion. Nathaniel Hayes. The murmur started immediately. A figure emerged from backstage, moving slowly, deliberately. He carried a white cane that tapped against the floor with each careful step. The man was black, somewhere in his 60s, his face weathered by years of hardship that showed in every line and crease. His suit was clean, but clearly borrowed, hanging slightly loose on his thin frame. His shoes, though polished, were worn at the heels. But it was his eyes that drew attention. Clouded with the unmistakable white film of blindness, they stared forward, at nothing, seeing only darkness where others saw light. The audience's whispers grew louder. Several judges leaned back in their seats, arms crossed. One shook his head almost imperceptibly. This was a serious competition. What was a blind, homeless man doing here? In the front row of the judges' panel, Dr. Grace Morrison sat perfectly still. Something about the man's gait, the way he held his head, tugged at a memory she couldn't quite place. She was a professor of musicology at Rhodes College, an accomplished pianist herself, and known for her exacting standards. She'd seen thousands of performers in her 25-year career. But something about this man. Nathaniel reached the piano bench with assistance from a stagehand. He sat down slowly, his hands resting on his knees for a moment. The concert hall held its breath. Several audience members exchanged skeptical glances. The head judge glanced at his watch. 10 seconds of silence stretched into eternity. Nathaniel's weathered hands rose slowly, trembling slightly as they hovered over the keys. He took one deep breath. Then his fingers descended. The first note was so soft, so gentle, it was almost a whisper. A single key in the upper register, clear as a bell, pure as morning light. Then another, and another. The melody that emerged wasn't from any known composition. It was something else entirely. Something that seemed to come from a place deeper than memory, older than grief, more powerful than loss. The folk jazz fusion carried hints of New Orleans bayou music, the kind of sound that rises from the Mississippi Delta on humid summer nights. But woven through it was something uniquely personal, achingly intimate. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told a story. Within 30 seconds, the skeptical whispers had died completely. The concert hall fell into a silence so profound you could hear the old building settle, hear the chandelier crystals softly chiming in the air conditioning's breeze. Nathaniel's face was serene now, almost transcendent. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but his expression held peace. His fingers moved across the keys with absolute certainty, as if they'd known this path their entire lives, as if the piano itself was guiding them home. In the judges' panel, Dr. Grace Morrison's breath caught in her throat. Her hand rose to her mouth. Her eyes widened in recognition and disbelief. That melody. She knew that melody. It was impossible. Utterly impossible. But there was no mistaking it. Her mother used to sing that exact melody when Grace was a child 40 years ago. A lullaby her mother had composed herself, never written down, never recorded, never shared with anyone outside their tiny family. Her mother called it Moonlight Over the Bayou. Grace's hands began to tremble. She leaned forward, staring at the blind man with new intensity. The shape of his jaw, the way his head tilted when he played, the particular curve of his shoulders. No, it couldn't be. Her brother Nathaniel had disappeared 30 years ago. Last she'd heard, he was homeless somewhere in Texas. She'd searched for him for 2 decades, hired private investigators, posted on every missing persons website, never stopped hoping. But the trail had gone cold years ago. This man couldn't be. Could he? The music swelled, building toward something magnificent. Nathaniel's whole body moved with the melody, now swaying gently, completely lost in the sound. The audience sat transfixed, many with tears streaming down their faces, though they couldn't have said exactly why this music moved them so deeply. But to understand how this impossible moment came to be, to comprehend the journey that led a blind homeless man to this stage, to this piano, to this melody that was bringing a renowned music professor to the edge of her seat, with recognition dawning in her eyes. We need to go back, way back, to where it all began. New Orleans in the 1960s was a city of contradictions. Jazz filled the air on Bourbon Street while poverty lined the back alleys. Wealth and want existed blocks apart. And in the 7th Ward, in a shotgun house with peeling paint and a roof that leaked when it rained, a baby boy named Nathaniel Hayes came into the world on a sweltering August night. His mother, Lorraine Hayes, was just 19 years old. She'd been singing in jazz clubs since she was 15, her voice a smoky contralto that could break hearts or lift spirits depending on the song. She had dreams once, dreams of recording contracts and concert tours. But those dreams got smaller when Nathaniel was born, and smaller still 3 years later when his sister Grace arrived. Still, Lorraine never lost her love of music. She couldn't afford voice lessons for her children, but she had something better. She had an old upright piano, scarred and battered, that a club owner had given her when he upgraded his equipment. It was missing 2 keys in the lower register, and the middle C stuck sometimes. But to young Nathaniel, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Lorraine would sit at that piano in the evenings after her shift at the diner, where she'd taken a day job to make ends meet. She'd play and sing, and her children would curl up on either side of her, on the bench. Small, warm bodies pressed against hers, breathing in time with the music. The lullaby she sang them was her own composition. She'd made it up the night Nathaniel was born, humming it while she rocked him, adding layers and complexity over the years. She called it Moonlight Over the Bayou, and it captured everything she felt about motherhood, about hope, about the particular magic of raising children in a city that could be both brutal and beautiful. Nathaniel showed an uncanny aptitude for music from the age of 4. His small fingers would find the keys even when he wasn't looking, picking out melodies he'd heard Lorraine play. By 6, he could reproduce any song after hearing it once. By 8, he was composing simple pieces of his own. Lorraine couldn't afford formal lessons, but she taught him everything she knew. Theory, chord progressions, the emotional language of music, how a single note could carry joy or sorrow depending on what came before and after it. Music ain't just about the notes, baby, she'd tell him, her hands guiding his on the keys. It's about what you feel here. She'd tap his chest right over his heart. You play from here, people gonna listen. You play from here. She'd tap his head. They gonna hear, but they won't feel. And feeling is everything. Young Grace would sit on the floor nearby, playing with her dolls, but always listening. She loved watching her brother and mother at the piano, loved the way their faces would light up when they played together. Even at 5 years old, she understood that this was something special, something sacred. The Hayes family didn't have much. Their furniture was secondhand. Their clothes came from thrift stores. Some weeks' dinner was rice and beans 4 nights running. But they had music, and they had each other, and in that shotgun house in the 7th Ward, that was enough. Until it wasn't. Nathaniel was 16 when his mother started losing weight. At first she blamed it on working double shifts. Then she blamed stress. But when she started coughing blood, she finally went to the free clinic. The diagnosis was lung cancer, advanced. The doctor, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, explained that it had probably been growing for years. Lorraine had never smoked a day in her life, but she'd worked in those jazz clubs since she was a teenager, breathing in secondhand smoke night after night in cramped, poorly ventilated rooms. Treatment was expensive. Even with charity care, there were costs. Medicine, special foods, transportation to appointments. Lorraine kept working as long as she could, kept singing, even when every breath hurt because stopping meant giving up, and she had 2 children who needed her. Nathaniel watched his mother fade slowly over 2 years. He was 18 when she finally couldn't get out of bed anymore. Grace was 15. They took turns sitting with her, holding her hand, trying to be strong. One night, near the end, Lorraine called Nathaniel to her bedside. Her voice was barely a whisper now. "Play it for me, baby," she said. "Our song." Nathaniel sat at the old piano, tears streaming down his face, and played Moonlight Over the Bayou. His fingers found every note, every nuance, every emotion she'd taught him to put into the music. Grace sat beside their mother, holding her hand. Lorraine closed her eyes and smiled. The last thing she heard before slipping into unconsciousness was her son playing the lullaby she'd created for him 18 years before. She died the next morning as the sun rose over the bayou. The medical bills were crushing. Even with charity care, they owed thousands. The funeral costs added more. Nathaniel had to drop out of school 3 months before graduation to work full-time at a chemical plant. It was brutal labor, hot and dangerous, but it paid better than anything else he could get without a diploma. Grace was placed with their mother's sister, Aunt Deborah, who lived in Atlanta. Deborah was married to a lawyer, had money, could give Grace opportunities. A good school, college prospects, a future. But Deborah could only take 1 child. She chose Grace because Grace was younger, more adaptable. Nathaniel was nearly grown, she reasoned. He could make his own way. The day Grace left for Atlanta was the 2nd worst day of Nathaniel's life. She was 15 years old, crying in the doorway of the shotgun house, begging him to come with her. "I can't, Gracie," he said, kneeling down to her level. "I gotta work, gotta pay off Mama's bills. But you go. You get that education. Make Mama proud. Promise you'll call me." Grace sobbed. "Every week. Promise. I promise, little sister. I promise." He kept that promise for exactly 8 weeks. The piano had to be sold to pay the last of the medical bills. A dealer came and hauled it away, that scarred upright that had been the soundtrack of Nathaniel's childhood. He stood in the empty space where it had been and felt something break inside him that he didn't have words for. Without the piano, without his mother, without Grace, the shotgun house felt like a tomb. Nathaniel worked 12-hour shifts at the plant, came home to an empty house, and tried not to think about music because music was his mother's voice and his sister's laughter and everything he'd lost. He met Rebecca at this plant. She worked in the office handling payroll. She was pretty and kind, and when she smiled at him, it was the first time he'd felt anything but numbness in months. They started dating. 6 months later, at 21, they got married in a quick ceremony at City Hall. For a little while, Nathaniel thought maybe he could build a new life, a different life. Rebecca didn't know about his musical past, didn't know about the prodigy he'd once been. To her, he was just Nate, a hard worker with a gentle soul who made her laugh. They rented a small apartment, talked about saving for a house, maybe kids someday. Normal dreams, ordinary hopes. Nathaniel was 25 when everything shattered for the second time. It happened on a Tuesday morning, third shift. He was working on the distillation line when a valve ruptured. The chemical spray hit 3 workers, but Nathaniel caught the worst of it. The caustic liquid splashed directly into his face. The pain was beyond description, beyond thought, beyond anything he'd imagined pain could be. He screamed, clawed at his eyes, fell to his knees. His co-workers dragged him to the emergency shower, but the damage was done. 3 days later, when they removed the bandages, the doctor's face told him everything before the words came. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. The corneal damage is too extensive. Even with surgery, which frankly you can't afford, the prognosis for vision recovery is essentially 0. You're going to be blind. Blind." The word echoed in his head like a death sentence. No more colors, no more faces, no more seeing the sunrise over the bayou, or the stars at night, or the way light played on water. No more reading, no more driving, no more working the job that barely supported him and Rebecca. No more normal. The workers' compensation paid for basic living expenses for 6 months while he learned to navigate his new reality. Rebecca tried to be supportive at first. She really did. But watching her husband sink into depression, refuse to learn Braille, refuse to use a cane, refuse to do anything but sit in their apartment and drink cheap whiskey from the bottle was more than she could handle. She left after a year, packed her things while he sat on the couch, staring at nothing with eyes that saw nothing. She cried when she told him, said she still loved him, but couldn't watch him destroy himself. Said he needed help she couldn't give. The apartment was too expensive for one person on disability. Nathaniel moved to a cheaper place, then a cheaper place still. Each move took him further from anything resembling the life he'd known. He stopped calling Grace. Couldn't bear to tell her what had happened. Couldn't stand the pity he knew would be in her voice. The last time they spoke, he told her he was fine, everything was fine. He'd call next week. He never called. Grace tried for months calling his old number that had been disconnected, writing letters that came back marked "Return to Sender." She called the chemical plant, but they said he no longer worked there and had left no forwarding address. Slowly, painfully, Grace had to accept that her brother was gone. Not dead, perhaps, but gone nonetheless. Lost somewhere in the vastness of America, unwilling or unable to be found. For Nathaniel, the next 20 years blurred together into one long night, literally and figuratively. He drifted south, then west, then north again, following warm weather and rumors of cities where the homeless shelters had open beds. Houston, Dallas, Little Rock, Jackson, Birmingham. He learned to navigate the world blind. Learned the tap of a cane on pavement. Learned to count steps between intersections. Learned to read people's intentions in their voices. Learned which shelter workers were kind and which ones were cruel. learned where the soup kitchen served on which days, learned how to survive, if not how to live. Music haunted him. He'd hear it sometimes drifting from open car windows or bars or street performers, and it was like a knife to the heart every time. He avoided it when he could. Crossed the street to get away from musicians. Kept walking when street performers played. But at night, in whatever shelter or doorway or park bench he'd claimed his mother's lullaby would drift through his mind. Moonlight over the bayou. He'd hear it in her voice. Feel Grace's small, warm body pressed against his side. Smell the particular must of that old upright piano. The memories hurt too much to bear and too much to let go. 20 years of wandering. 20 years of slowly forgetting what it felt like to have a home, to have a name that meant something, to be anyone other than just another invisible, homeless man. Until Memphis. Winter 2008 hit Memphis hard. The temperatures plunged into the teens, and for homeless people without shelter, it was lethal. 3 people froze to death in the first week of January alone. Nathaniel had been in Memphis for about 6 months, staying mostly in the Fraser neighborhood, where a Salvation Army shelter had a few beds. But on the coldest night of the year, January 10th, the shelter was full. The worker, a woman with tired eyes and a kind voice, pressed a blanket into his hands and directed him to an overpass where others were gathering. He almost didn't make it. The cold was vicious, cutting through his layers of clothes like they weren't there. His fingers went numb first, then his toes. He couldn't stop shivering. Around midnight, he started feeling warm, which some distant part of his brain recognized as a very bad sign. He was found at 2 a.m. by Pastor William Foster of Crossroads Community Church, who was making rounds with blankets and hot coffee. The pastor took one look at Nathaniel, shivering violently and barely conscious, and made a decision that would change both their lives. "Can you walk?" Pastor Foster asked, his voice urgent. Cold," was all Nathaniel could manage. "I know, brother. I know. Come on, my church is 3 blocks. We're gonna get you warm." Pastor Foster half-carried Nathaniel those 3 blocks, got him into the church basement where there was a small room with a space heater, wrapped him in every blanket he could find, made him sweet tea, and forced him to drink it slowly. It took hours for Nathaniel to stop shivering. When he finally could speak properly, the first thing he said was, "Why? Why, what, son? Why help me, don't know me? I'm nobody." Pastor Foster was quiet for a moment. He was a black man in his 50s, with silver threading through his short hair and deep lines around his eyes that came from smiling. But his voice was serious when he answered. "Every person is somebody to God. You hear me, every single one. I don't know your story, brother, and you don't have to tell me. But I know you matter. Now rest." When Nathaniel woke the next morning, he found hot food waiting and a proposition. The church needed someone to help with maintenance, cleaning basic repairs, keeping the grounds. It didn't pay much, barely more than disability, but it came with that small room in the basement. Heat in winter. Air conditioning in summer. A door that locked. "You interested?" Pastor Foster asked. Nathaniel, who hadn't had a real job in 20 years, who hadn't had a room to himself in a decade, who hadn't felt wanted or needed in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like, could only nod. He started work the next week. The tasks were simple enough that he could do them blind. Sweeping floors, taking out trash, running a vacuum he could hear, changing light bulbs, ironic as that was. The church members got used to seeing him, this quiet, blind man who kept to himself but did his work thoroughly. Pastor Foster checked on him regularly, brought him to church dinners, Introduced him around, though Nathaniel never said much. The pastor didn't push. He seemed to understand that some wounds needed time. 10 years passed this way. Slow years. Quiet years. Nathaniel found a kind of peace in the routine, if not happiness. He had a roof over his head, regular meals, safety. It was more than he'd had in 2 decades. He still avoided music. The church had a piano, an old upright in the sanctuary that the choir director played on Sundays. Nathaniel made sure to schedule his cleaning for times when the sanctuary was empty and silent. But in June of 2018, everything changed again. Pastor Foster asked him to clean out the old church basement that hadn't been touched in years. The church was founded in 1902, and over more than a century, the basement had accumulated layers of history. Old hymnals, broken pews, boxes of records from congregations long gone. Nathaniel worked slowly, methodically. He used his cane and his hands to map out the space to identify what was trash and what might be salvageable. It took him 3 evenings to work through most of it. On the 4th evening, in the furthest corner of the basement behind a stack of chairs and beneath a dusty tarp, his cane struck something that resonated differently than wood or cardboard. He pulled the tarp back carefully, ran his hands over smooth wood, traced the familiar shape. A piano, not an upright. A grand piano, or at least what his exploring hands suggested might be a baby grand. Dust lay thick on every surface. Several keys stuck when he pressed them experimentally. The bench was there too, cobwebbed and musty. Nathaniel stood there for a long moment, his hands resting on the piano's closed fallboard, his heart racing. He should leave, should cover it back up, should forget he ever found it. Music was his old life, the life that had brought him nothing but pain and loss. But his hands, seeming to move of their own accord, lifted the fallboard. The keys were yellowed with age, several chipped. The piano was desperately out of tune, but it was real, solid, waiting. Nathaniel sat down on the bench. 20 years since he'd touched piano keys. 20 years since he'd let himself even think about playing. His hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. One finger descended. Middle C, though it came out sharp and tinny. Then another note. Another. And then, as if a dam had broken, as if his fingers remembered something his brain had tried to forget, the melody came. Moonlight Over the Bayou. It was rough at first, halting. Wrong notes mixed with right ones. The piano's poor tuning made it sound alien, but the bones of the melody were there, rising from the keys like a ghost, like a memory, like his mother's voice singing to him 40 years ago. Nathaniel started to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. His hands kept playing even as tears streamed down his face. All the grief he'd carried for 2 decades, all the loss, all the pain came pouring out through his fingers into those dusty keys. He didn't hear Pastor Foster come down the stairs, didn't know the pastor was there until he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. Nathaniel stopped playing, tried to apologize, but the pastor just squeezed his shoulder. "How long you been carrying that inside you, brother? And too long," Nathaniel whispered. "Too long. What was that song my mother wrote it, for me, when I was born?" Pastor Foster was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that would change Nathaniel's life. "You know, this piano's been down here for 30 years or more. Belonged to the founding pastor's wife. She played it every Sunday until she passed in the 80s. Been in storage ever since." He paused. "Maybe it's been waiting for you." "I can't," Nathaniel said. I don't play anymore. Haven't in 20 years, the pastor guessed gently. Seems to me your hands remember just fine. Over the next few days, Pastor Foster had the piano tuned. It cost the church budget, but he didn't hesitate. The piano tuner, an elderly Vietnamese man who'd been tuning Memphis pianos for 40 years, whistled appreciatively when he saw it. This is 1890s Steinway, he said. Very rare, very valuable. Someone take good care of it once. It took him 6 hours to bring it back to proper pitch. When he finished, he played a scale. The sound that emerged was rich and warm and perfect. Someone gonna play this? He asked. Pastor Foster glanced at Nathaniel, who was standing in the doorway listening. Yes, the pastor said. Someone's going to play it. That night alone in the basement, Nathaniel sat at the newly tuned piano. He placed his hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. This time the notes came out true, clear, the way they were meant to sound. The melody of Moonlight Over the Bayou filled the basement, and it was like his mother was there with him. Like Grace was pressed against his side. Like he was 8 years old again in that shotgun house in New Orleans, and the piano was the center of the universe, and music was the language they all spoke. He played for 3 hours that night. The muscle memory came back faster than he'd thought possible. His fingers found chords he'd forgotten he knew. He improvised variations on the basic melody, adding complexity, adding layers his 18-year-old self couldn't have dreamed of. Because this wasn't a prodigy playing anymore. This was a man who'd lived through loss and pain and 2 decades of darkness. This was a man who'd been broken and was slowly putting himself back together. That experience that suffering that long night of the soul was in every note now. The music had depth it never had before. Weight, truth. Pastor Foster, lying in his bed upstairs, listened to the music drifting up through the floorboards and smiled. Then he began to pray. Because he'd just had an idea that seemed crazy. But then again, what about faith wasn't a little crazy? For the next 6 months, Nathaniel played every night. The basement became his sanctuary. The piano became his confessional, his therapist, his connection to everything he'd lost, and everything he might still find. He didn't just play his mother's lullaby, though he returned to it often. He started remembering other pieces, classical compositions he'd learned as a child. Jazz standards his mother had played. He improvised, letting his hands explore, no longer constrained by sheet music he couldn't read anyway. Being blind, he discovered changed how he heard music. Without visual distractions, every note had texture. Every chord had color, just not the kind sighted people saw. He could hear harmonics he'd never noticed before, could sense the vibrations of the piano's soundboard through the bench. He developed his own technique, one that relied entirely on touch and muscle memory and emotional intuition. His hands learned to see in their own way. Pastor Foster would sometimes sit on the basement stairs and listen. He'd heard skilled pianists before, but what Nathaniel was creating was something different, something raw and real and achingly beautiful. In September, the pastor approached Nathaniel with a newspaper. "Can I read you something?" he asked. Nathaniel, who was taking a break from playing, nodded. "It's about a piano competition," Pastor Foster said. "The Memphis Music Masters Competition. They have it every year, 3 rounds. Finals are at the Orpheum Theater. First prize is $10,000. He could feel Nathaniel tense beside him. "Pastor, I appreciate what you're thinking, but just hear me out," Pastor Foster interrupted gently. "This isn't about the money, though God knows you could use it. This is about your mother's song, that lullaby she wrote for you. Don't you think it deserves to be heard? Don't you think she'd want people to hear it?" "I'm blind," Nathaniel said flatly. "I look homeless because I was homeless. I'm 60 years old. I don't have training, don't have credentials. They'd laugh me off the stage." Maybe the pastor agreed, or maybe they'd hear what I hear every night. Music that comes from somewhere deeper than training, from somewhere true. "I can't." "You can," Pastor Foster said firmly. "But I won't make you. This has to be your choice. Just think about it. Pray on it." Nathaniel didn't think about much else for the next week. The competition deadline was in 2 weeks. Part of him wanted to dismiss the idea as foolish. But another part, the part that woke up at 3 in the morning and went to that basement piano and played his mother's lullaby to the empty room that part, wondered. What if he'd lost so much? His sight, his family, 20 years of his life to darkness and wandering. What if he could take all that loss, all that pain, and transform it into something beautiful? What if his mother's song, the one she'd composed for him 40 years ago, could live beyond their tiny shotgun house? What if Grace, wherever she was, could somehow hear it and know he was alive? The thought of Grace decided him. His sister. The girl he'd promised to call every week the promise he'd broken. The little girl who'd sat beside their mother while Nathaniel played, who'd cried when she had to leave for Atlanta, who'd searched for him for years before giving up. If there was even the smallest chance she might hear this music and know it was him. "Okay," he told Pastor Foster. "I'll do it." The application process was complicated, but the pastor helped him through it. They needed a recording of Nathaniel playing. The pastor borrowed a good microphone from the church sound system and recorded him playing Moonlight Over the Bayou in the basement. They needed a bio. Pastor Foster wrote it, keeping it simple. Nathaniel Hayes is a 60-year-old pianist from New Orleans who learned music from his mother. After losing his sight in an industrial accident, he stopped playing for 20 years. He recently rediscovered his love of music and is playing publicly for the first time. They needed an application fee. $75, which might as well have been $7,500 for Nathaniel. The pastor paid it from his own pocket, waving off Nathaniel's protests. "This is an investment," he said. "In you, and in that beautiful music you're making. Now stop arguing and get back to practicing." The acceptance letter came 3 weeks later. Nathaniel had made it to the preliminary round. He'd perform at a local venue in 2 weeks. If he passed, he'd move to the semifinals. And if he passed those, the finals at the Orpheum. The night before the preliminary round, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of all the ways this could go wrong. He'd trip on the way to the stage. He'd forget the melody. The piano would be different from what he was used to, and his hands wouldn't know where to go. The judges would take one look at him and decide before he played a note. At 2 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went to the basement. Sat at his piano, placed his hands on the keys. "Mama," he whispered into the darkness. "If you can hear me, I need you now. I need your courage, your strength. I'm so scared." The basement was silent. No voice answered. No sign came. But when he started to play, when that familiar melody began to flow from his fingers, he felt something. A warmth, a presence. Maybe it was just memory. Maybe it was imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, it was his mother's spirit saying what she used to say when he was afraid as a child: "Baby, you got this. Now play from your heart and let the music do the rest." He played until sunrise, his fingers moving over keys worn smooth by his touch, pouring everything he had into the music. Fear, hope, love, loss, longing. All of it channeled through those 88 keys. When he finally stopped, his hands were cramping and his back was stiff, but his mind was clear. He was ready. The preliminary round was held at a small theater in Midtown Memphis. About 100 people in the audience, maybe 20 competitors. Nathaniel waited backstage with Pastor Foster, listening to the others perform. They were good. Really good. Young conservatory students with flawless technique. A middle-aged woman who played Rachmaninoff like she was born to it. When they called his name, Pastor Foster squeezed his shoulder. "Remember why you're here," he said quietly. "Not for them. For her." Nathaniel made his way to the stage with his cane. He heard the audience's surprise in their shifting and murmuring, felt their skepticism like a physical weight. 3 judges sat in the front row, their faces neutral, but their body language saying everything. He sat at the piano, adjusted his position. The bench was different height than his basement piano. The keys felt different, slightly narrower spacing. He took 10 seconds to orient himself, to let his hands map this new instrument. Then he began to play. The first few notes were tentative. He was still adjusting, still learning this piano's voice. But by the 8th measure, he'd found his rhythm. By the 16th, he was lost in the music, and the theater around him disappeared. He played Moonlight Over the Bayou, exactly the way his mother had taught him, with all the variations and improvisations he'd developed over 6 months of nightly practice. The folk-jazz fusion filled the small theater, sweet and melancholy and hopeful all at once. When the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the applause began. Not polite applause, real applause. Several people stood. One of the judges, a woman in her 70s, was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Nathaniel advanced to the semifinals. The semifinals were harder. Better venue, bigger audience, tougher competition. Nathaniel made it through, but barely. 2 of the 3 judges voted to advance him. The 3rd judge, a stern-faced man from the Juilliard faculty, who was guest judging, abstained, saying Nathaniel's technique was unconventional at best. But unconventional was enough. He was going to the finals. The finals would be held at the Orpheum Theater, Memphis's grand old movie palace turned performing arts center. 1,200 seats, 5 judges, all of them renowned musicians or music professors. The performance would be streamed online. Nathaniel had 3 weeks to prepare. He practiced obsessively. 5-6 hours a night at the basement piano. His hands developed new calluses. His back ached from sitting so long, but the music got deeper, richer, more nuanced. Pastor Foster started to worry about him. "You need to rest, brother," he said one evening, finding Nathaniel at the piano at 11 p.m., having been there since dinner. "Can't," Nathaniel said, not stopping. "Not good enough yet. Good enough for what you've already made it to the finals. Nobody expected that. Not even me, to be honest. You've already won." "No," Nathaniel said fiercely. "No, I haven't. Good enough isn't good enough. It has to be perfect. It has to be. It has to be everything Mama put into it. Everything she was. Everything I've lost. Everything I've found. It all has to be in this music." The pastor was quiet for a moment, watching Nathaniel's hands move over the keys with desperate intensity. "You're not playing for the judges, are you?" he said finally. "You're playing for her. For your mother. And for Grace." Nathaniel whispered, "My sister. I lost her pastor 30 years ago. Just stopped calling. Stopped trying. Let her think I was dead, maybe. I need her to know I'm not. I need her to hear this and know it's me. Son, the chances of her watching this specific competition, I know, Nathaniel interrupted. "I know it's a long shot. Probably impossible. But it's the only shot I have. The only way I can think of to reach her. So it has to be perfect. It has to be undeniable. It has to be music that she'll hear and know instantly without question that it's me, that I remember, that I'm sorry, that I never stopped being her brother." Pastor Foster sat down on the basement stairs, his heart aching for this man who'd carried so much pain for so long. "Tell me about the piano," Nathaniel said suddenly. "The one I've been playing." "You said it belonged to the founding pastor's wife." "That's right, Emma Whitmore. She died in 1985, but she played that piano every Sunday for 50 years. And then it just sat here for 30 years. Well, her children wanted it to stay in the church. It had been blessed by Bishop Randall Clements in 1920 when the church bought it. Emma believed that blessing made it special, that it had been sanctified for holy purposes." Nathaniel's hands stilled on the keys. "Tell me more." "The story goes that Emma's family bought that piano brand new in 1892. It was a Steinway, which was expensive even then. They were wealthy, owned a cotton shipping business. The piano was Emma's 16th birthday present." Pastor Foster warmed to the story. "Emma played it for 73 years, can you imagine? Through 2 world wars, through the Depression, through the Civil Rights Movement. She used to say that piano had witnessed 100 years of prayers, and that every note played on it carried those prayers forward." "Did she ever play in competitions?" Nathaniel asked. "No. She only played for church. Said her music was worship, not performance. But people came from all over Memphis to hear her play on Sundays. They said she could make you feel the Holy Spirit move through those keys." Nathaniel ran his hands lightly over the piano's surface, feeling the smooth wood, the slight imperfections, the weight of history. "I feel it," he said quietly. "When I play, I feel something. Like the piano is, I don't know, like it wants this music to be played, like it's been waiting. Maybe it has been, the pastor said, waiting for someone who needed it as much as it needed them." A week before the finals, Nathaniel had a nightmare. He was on stage at the Orpheum, but when he tried to play, his hands wouldn't move. They were frozen stuck. The audience began to laugh. The judges shook their heads in disgust. His mother appeared in the front row, disappointment clear on her face, and walked out. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart racing. He spent the rest of that night at the piano playing until his hands cramped. Playing until he'd proven to himself that they still worked, that the music was still there. The day before the finals, Pastor Foster found him in the basement, not playing, just sitting at the piano with his head in his hands. "What if I fail?" Nathaniel asked. "What if I get up there and freeze? What if my hands forget? What if—" "Stop," the pastor said firmly. He sat down beside Nathaniel on the bench. "Listen to me. You've already done the impossible. You came back from 20 years of darkness. You found your music again. You made it to the finals of a major competition. Whether you win or lose tomorrow doesn't change any of that. But Grace. If Grace is meant to hear this, she will. If she's meant to find you, she will. You can't control that. All you can control is whether you show up tomorrow and play from your heart. That's it. That's all anyone can ask." Nathaniel took a shaky breath. "I'm terrified. I know. But remember what you told me your mother used to say. You're not playing for them. You're playing for her. And son, I guarantee you, wherever your mother is, she's already proud. Win or lose, she's proud." That night, Nathaniel played Moonlight Over the Bayou one last time in the basement. Not to practice, not to perfect it, just to remember, just to feel his mother's presence one more time before walking onto that stage. The melody filled the basement, sweet and sad and hopeful. and for just a moment, Nathaniel could swear he smelled his mother's perfume, that cheap drugstore brand she used to wear. Could feel Grace's small hand in his. Could hear the sound of rain on the roof of their shotgun house in New Orleans. Home. After 30 years of wandering, he'd finally found his way home. Not to a place, but to a moment, to a melody, to himself. Tomorrow, he'd share that with the world. Tonight it was enough to know it was still there. The Orpheum Theater gleamed under October stars. Built in 1928, it had hosted everyone from Duke Ellington to B.B. King, from vaudeville acts to opera performances. Its ornate facade, its crystalline chandeliers, its perfect acoustics made it the crown jewel of Memphis's music scene. Tonight, 1,200 people filled its seats. The Memphis Music Masters Competition finals had drawn the city's cultural elite. Local media was there. The performance was being live-streamed to thousands more. Backstage, Nathaniel sat alone in a small dressing room, his hands folded in his lap. Pastor Foster had offered to stay with him, but Nathaniel had asked for time alone. He needed to center himself, to remember why he was here. He could hear the muffled sounds of the other finalists. There were 12 total. He'd heard some of them during the semifinals. A brilliant 18-year-old from Juilliard who played Chopin like she was channeling the composer himself. A jazz pianist from Berkeley whose improvisations were breathtaking. A classical virtuoso who'd performed with symphony orchestras around the world. And then there was him, 60 years old, blind. No formal training beyond what his mother had taught him 40 years ago. Playing a lullaby she'd composed in a shotgun house in New Orleans that no one had ever heard before. What was he doing here? His hands started to tremble. The doubt he'd been fighting for weeks came flooding back. This was insane, foolish. He was going to embarrass himself. Embarrass Pastor Foster, dishonor his mother's memory by playing her song badly in front of thousands. He should leave, should walk out the back door, should a knock at the dressing room door. Mr. Hayes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Nathaniel stood on shaking legs, picked up his white cane, made his way to the wings. From his position backstage, he could hear the audience, their murmurs of conversation, the rustle of programs, someone laughing. The excitement in the air was palpable. He heard the other contestants performing. Each one was phenomenal. The 18-year-old Juilliard student brought the house down with a Rachmaninoff concerto. The jazz pianist's improvisation earned a standing ovation. The classical virtuoso's Beethoven was technically perfect. How could his simple lullaby compare to any of this Mr. Hayes, "You're up next"? Pastor Foster appeared beside him, as he'd promised he would. "I can't do this," Nathaniel whispered. The pastor took his hand. "Yes, you can, but not for them." He placed something in Nathaniel's palm. A photograph, though Nathaniel couldn't see it. "This is a picture of your mother I found in some old church records. She sang at a revival here in 1975. You can't see it, but she's smiling. That's who you're playing for tonight. Not the judges, not the audience. Her." Nathaniel's fingers traced the photograph's edges. He couldn't see his mother's smile, but he could feel it, could remember it. "You got this, brother," Pastor Foster said. "Now go make her proud." The MC's voice carried through the theater. "Our final performer of the evening is Nathaniel Hayes." Nathaniel stepped onto the stage. The audience's reaction was immediate. Whispers, surprise. The sight of a blind, 60-year-old man in a borrowed suit moving carefully with a white cane was not what they'd expected at a classical piano competition. In the judges' panel, Dr. Grace Morrison sat forward slightly. There was something about this man, the way he held himself, the deliberate grace of his movements despite the cane. Something familiar that she couldn't place. She glanced at the program. Nathaniel Hayes from New Orleans. Hayes. That was her birth name before her aunt and uncle adopted her, and she became a Morrison. But Hayes wasn't an uncommon name. Couldn't be. No. Her brother Nathaniel would be 60 now, about this man's age. But her brother wasn't blind, and he'd disappeared in Texas, not Memphis. This was just coincidence. Still, she couldn't look away. Nathaniel reached the piano bench with assistance from a stagehand. He sat down slowly, his hands resting on his knees. The Orpheum's grand piano was magnificent, a concert-grade Steinway Model D that had been meticulously maintained. But to Nathaniel's hands, it was alien. Different size, different touch, different voice than the piano he'd been practicing on. He had 10 seconds to adjust, to learn this new instrument, to overcome his fear. The theater held its breath. One of the other judges leaned toward his colleague. Did they seriously let a blind, homeless man into the finals? He whispered, not quietly enough. Grace shot him a look that could have melted steel. Nathaniel heard the comment, felt it like a slap. For a moment, the old shame rose up. He was nobody, nothing. A broken man who had no business being here. Then he remembered Pastor Foster's words. He was playing for his mother, not for them. He raised his hands, placed them gently on the keys, took one deep breath, and began to play. The first note was so soft it was almost a whisper. E above middle C, pure and clear. Then G, then B. The opening phrase of Moonlight Over the Bayou emerged slowly, gently, like dawn breaking over water. The melody was deceptively simple at first, folk-like, almost childlike in its innocence. But there was something underneath it, something that made the audience lean forward, a sadness, a longing. Nathaniel's hands moved across the keys with absolute certainty now. The fear was gone. The self-doubt had vanished. There was only the music, only the memory of his mother's voice, only the feeling of Grace's small, warm body pressed against his side as they sat at that old upright piano in New Orleans. The melody began to develop, to grow more complex. Jazz harmonies wove through the folk structure. Improvised runs added texture. The music swelled and retreated, built and released, told a story without words. In the audience, people sat transfixed. This wasn't virtuosic technique like the Juilliard student. It wasn't complex improvisation like the jazz pianist. It was something else entirely. Something raw and honest and achingly beautiful. It was a man playing his heart out, playing his life story, playing every loss and every hope and every moment of darkness and light. The judges sat motionless. Even the skeptical one had uncrossed his arms, and Grace Morrison's hands had begun to tremble. That melody. She knew that melody. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But there was no mistaking it. The opening phrase, the specific jazz chord in the 5th measure, the folk-like turn in the 9th measure. Her mother had sung those exact notes to her every night for the first 15 years of her life. This was Moonlight Over the Bayou, her mother's lullaby, the one she'd composed herself, the one she'd never written down, never recorded, never shared with anyone outside their family. The only people who knew this melody were Grace, her mother, and Grace's eyes widened. She leaned forward, staring at the blind man at the piano with new intensity. The shape of his jaw, the way his shoulders curved when he played, the particular tilt of his head, the way his fingers moved, the same graceful economy of movement she remembered from when she was 5 years old, watching her brother play that old upright. No, it couldn't be. But the melody didn't lie. Nathaniel's playing had reached its emotional peak. Tears streamed down his face, but he didn't stop. His whole body moved with the music now swaying gently. This was no longer a performance. This was prayer. This was confession. This was a man laying his soul bare. The melody shifted, became more complex. He was adding variations, improvisations that his 18-year-old self could never have dreamed of. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told truth. This was music born of suffering, shaped by loss, polished by 30 years of darkness. And it was the most beautiful thing Grace had ever heard. Because she understood now what the other judges couldn't. This wasn't just any lullaby. This was their mother's voice, captured in melody. This was their childhood, their family, their love translated into music. This was everything they'd lost, everything that had been taken from them, somehow miraculously preserved, and now being shared with the world. Grace's vision blurred with tears. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together. She wanted to run up on that stage to look at this man's face, to know for certain. But she couldn't move, could only listen as her brother, the brother she'd thought lost forever, played their mother's song. The music built toward its climax. Nathaniel's hands flew across the keys, the melody soaring, reaching for something transcendent. Every person in the Orpheum was leaning forward now, caught in the spell of this music, this moment. And then, with exquisite gentleness, the music began to descend, to soften, to return to the simple folk melody it had begun with. Like a journey completed, like a circle closed, like someone coming home. The final note hung in the air, suspended, perfect. Then silence. 5 seconds of absolute crystalline silence. Grace Morrison was on her feet before she realized she was moving. Her hands came together in applause that sounded like thunder in the silent theater. Then others stood. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. The entire Orpheum Theater rose in a standing ovation. But Grace wasn't applauding anymore. She was moving, half running toward the stage, tears streaming down her face, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Nathaniel sat at the piano, overwhelmed. He could hear the applause, feel it like a physical wave. But he was depleted, empty, wrung out. He'd poured everything he had into that music. There was nothing left. He heard footsteps running up the stage steps. Fast. Urgent. Then a woman's voice, choked with tears, saying one word, Nate. Nathaniel's breath caught. He knew that voice. Older, deeper, but unmistakably the same voice that had said, "Promise you'll call me every week 30 years ago." "Gracie," he whispered. "Grace." Morrison fell to her knees beside the piano bench, grabbed her brother's hands, and sobbed. Oh my God, it's really you. I've been looking for you for 30 years. 30 years, Nate? I thought you were dead. I thought I'd never—" She couldn't finish, could only hold his hands and cry. Nathaniel turned toward her voice, his clouded eyes seeing nothing but his heart, seeing everything. "Grace. Little. Gracie. You're here." I'm here. I'm one of the judges. I've been here the whole time. When you played Mama's song, I knew it was you." The audience was on their feet, but not applauding anymore. Watching, bearing witness to something sacred. A reunion 3 decades in the making, orchestrated by a lullaby written 40 years ago by a jazz singer who'd died too young, but whose love had transcended death itself. The other judges stood back, tears in their own eyes. The skeptical one from Juilliard was crying openly, not even trying to hide it. Pastor Foster watched from the wings, his hands clasped in prayer, tears of joy streaming down his face. Grace and Nathaniel held each other, brother and sister, reunited by music, by memory, by a mother's love that had never died, had only waited for the right moment to bring her children back together. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel kept saying. "I'm so sorry I disappeared. I'm sorry I stopped calling." "I'm sorry." "Stop," Grace said fiercely. "You're here now. You're alive. You played Mama's song. That's all that matters." She pulled back enough to look at him. Really look at him. Older, worn, blind, but still her brother. Still the boy who'd protected her, taught her, loved her. "I've been searching for you," she said. "Since I was 18. Private investigators. Missing persons databases. Everything. I never gave up hope, but I thought maybe you didn't want to be found." "I was ashamed," Nathaniel said quietly, "of what I'd become, of failing. I couldn't bear for you to see me like that." "You didn't fail," Grace said fiercely. "You survived. And you made it here. To this moment. To this music." "Nate, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Mama would be so proud." The head judge approached slowly, not wanting to intrude, but aware that they had a show to finish. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I hate to interrupt, but we need to complete the judging. Dr. Morrison, are you able to—" Grace looked up, realizing that she was still a judge, that she had a job to do. But how could she possibly be objective about this? "I need to recuse myself," she said. "This is my brother. I can't judge his performance fairly." "I understand," the head judge said. "But for what it's worth, the vote would be unanimous anyway, even without yours." He turned to address the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all just witnessed something extraordinary. While the judges confer for the formal vote, please give Nathaniel Hayes one more round of applause." The Orpheum erupted again. The ovation went on for 5 full minutes. The judges didn't need to confer for long. The vote was, as predicted, unanimous. Nathaniel Hayes, the blind 60-year-old former homeless man who'd learned piano from his mother in a New Orleans shotgun house, who'd lost everything and spent 20 years in darkness, who'd found a dusty piano in a church basement and remembered how to live again, won first place. But the true prize was already holding his hand, crying and laughing and saying his name over and over again like a prayer. His sister, his Grace, his family. Home. The local Memphis News covered the story that night. By morning, it had gone regional. By afternoon, national. The video of Nathaniel's performance, combined with the reunion with his sister, went viral. 5 million views in the first 24 hours, 10 million by the end of the week, 50 million by the end of the month. People couldn't get enough of the story. The blind pianist, the lost lullaby, the impossible reunion. It had everything. Hope, loss, love, redemption. Grace took her brother home that night to the house she shared with her husband in the Memphis suburbs. A real home with guest rooms and a piano in the living room and a yard where birds sang in the morning. For the first time in 30 years, Nathaniel slept in a real bed in a real house with family nearby. He woke up several times during the night, disoriented, convinced it was all a dream. But each time he'd hear Grace moving around in the kitchen or her husband's gentle snoring from down the hall, and he'd remember. It was real. He'd found his way back. Over the next few weeks, the story unfolded. Grace explained how she'd changed her name when her aunt and uncle adopted her formally at 18, how she'd become Dr. Grace Morrison, professor of musicology at Rhodes College, how she'd never stopped searching for her brother, had kept that search active for 20 years, before finally reluctantly accepting that he might never be found. "I became a judge for this competition because of you," she told him one evening as they sat at her piano. "Because of Mama. I wanted to honor her memory to make sure beautiful music still had a place in the world. And every year I'd sit in that judges panel and listen for something that would move me the way our mother's music did." "And you found it," Nathaniel said quietly. "I found you," she corrected. "The music was just the beacon that led me home." Nathaniel told his story too. The accident, the blindness, the 20 years of wandering, the moment he found that piano in the church basement, and something in him that had been dead for so long flickered back to life. "Pastor Foster saved me," Nathaniel said. "Not just my life that night in the cold, my soul. He gave me back my music, gave me back myself." The church and Pastor Foster suddenly found themselves famous too. Donations poured in. The pastor used them to expand the church's outreach programs to help more people like Nathaniel who were lost and needed finding. The piano, that 1890s Steinway that had sat in the basement for 30 years, became the center of another beautiful story. Crossroads Community Church wanted to gift it to Nathaniel. He'd earned it, they said. It was his now. But Nathaniel made a different proposal. "Donate it to the Memphis Music Museum," he said. "But with a condition, put a plaque on it. In memory of Lorraine Hayes, 1944 to 1981, who taught her son that music comes from the heart. Let it be there so people can see it, hear its story. Let it inspire someone else the way it inspired me." Pastor Foster agreed. The museum was thrilled to accept such a historically significant instrument with such a powerful story attached. The dedication ceremony was held 2 months after the competition. The museum's main hall was packed. Nathaniel played Moonlight Over the Bayou one more time on that piano, with Grace standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. The plaque was unveiled. It read, "1892 Steinway Grand Piano, donated by Crossroads Community Church. In memory of Lorraine Hayes, 1944 to 1981. Who taught her children that music is the language of the soul. Played by Nathaniel Hayes, Memphis. Music Masters Competition Champion, 2018. Every note is a prayer. Every melody is hope." The piano became one of the museum's most visited exhibits. People came from across the country to see it, to read its story, to imagine the blind man who'd found redemption through its keys. But the piano was just an object. The real legacy was what happened after. Nathaniel moved in permanently with Grace and her husband. They converted their music room into a studio for him. Gave him a piano of his own, a beautiful Yamaha Grand that Grace had been saving for years for the right occasion. He started teaching. Not formally at first, just a few students, kids with disabilities who'd been told they couldn't do music, adults who'd given up their dreams decades ago and wanted to try again, people who were lost and needed to find themselves through sound. His teaching method was unique. Because he couldn't demonstrate visually, he taught through touch and feeling and emotion. He'd place a student's hands on the keys and play with them, letting them feel the music through the vibrations the way he'd learned to hear it. Music isn't about seeing the notes, he'd tell them. It's about feeling them. About letting them speak what words can't say. His students thrived. The word spread. Within a year, he had a waiting list. A documentary filmmaker reached out wanting to tell his story. Nathaniel agreed on the condition that half the proceeds went to programs supporting homeless people and people with disabilities. The documentary, titled Moonlight Over the Bayou: Finding Home Through Music, premiered at Sundance. It won the Audience Award. It got picked up by a streaming service. Millions more people heard the story. Nathaniel received invitations to perform. Symphony orchestras wanted him. Concert halls across the country offered stages. A record label wanted to produce an album. He did some of it. Performed at a few select venues, always playing Moonlight Over the Bayou and always dedicating it to his mother. Made one album, all original compositions, inspired by his journey, with all proceeds going to charity. But he turned down most of the offers, because he'd learned something in those 20 years of darkness. Fame didn't matter. Success didn't matter. Only connection mattered. Only love mattered. Only being present for the people who needed you mattered. He wanted to be there for Grace to make up for the 30 years they'd lost. He wanted to teach his students. He wanted to volunteer at Pastor Foster's church playing piano for services helping other lost people find their way. He'd been lost for so long. Now that he was found, he wanted to help others find their way home too. 2 years after the competition, on what would have been their mother's 75th birthday, Grace and Nathaniel returned to New Orleans together. To the 7th Ward. To the street where their shotgun house had stood. The house was gone, torn down decades ago. A new building stood in its place. But they stood on that spot together, brother and sister, and Nathaniel played Moonlight Over the Bayou on a portable keyboard Grace had brought. Neighbors came out to listen. Some of them remembered Lorraine Hayes, the young jazz singer who died too young. They cried when they heard her son playing her song. One elderly woman approached after. "Your mama would be so proud," she said. "She always said you were special, Nate. Always said you had a gift." Guess she was right. Nathaniel could only nod, too moved to speak. That night in their hotel room, Grace asked him something she'd been wondering for months. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't had that accident? If you'd kept your sight, kept playing music all along?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "I used to," he said finally. "In those first years, I was so angry. Angry at the universe for taking my sight. Angry at myself for all the choices that led to that moment. But now," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Now I think maybe I needed to lose everything to understand what really mattered. When I could see I took so much for granted. My family, my music, my very ability to play. I thought I had forever to appreciate those things, and then they were gone." "But you found them again," Grace said softly. "I found something better," Nathaniel corrected. "I found gratitude. I found humility. I found understanding. The music I make now, it's not as technically perfect as what I played at 18. But it's true. It's real. It comes from a place of knowing what it's like to lose everything and somehow impossibly find your way back." He reached out, found Grace's hand, squeezed it. "I wouldn't trade these last 2 years with you for anything, not even for my sight back, because I had to go through all that darkness to appreciate this light, had to lose you to understand how precious you are. Had to forget how to play to remember why I play." Grace cried and hugged her brother tight. "Mama would say that's her speaking through you," she said. "She always could find the lesson in everything. She's still teaching us," Nathaniel agreed. "Through that lullaby, through this journey. She's still here, Gracie. In every note, in every memory, in every moment we have together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, brother and sister together after 30 years apart, held together by a melody their mother had composed 40 years ago. 3 years after the Memphis Music Masters Competition, Nathaniel Hayes sat at the piano in his sister's home, teaching a young girl how to play. The girl was 7 years old and deaf, and her parents had been told she'd never be able to learn music. Nathaniel taught her through vibrations, through feeling, through the same techniques he'd developed for himself. "You don't need to hear the notes with your ears," he told her, placing her hands on the piano's soundboard so she could feel it vibrate. "You hear them here." He touched her chest over her heart. "Music lives inside you. The piano just helps let it out." The girl's face lit up with understanding. Her hands found the keys. The notes that emerged were simple, halting, but real. Her parents, watching from the doorway, cried. After the lesson, Nathaniel sat alone at the piano for a moment. He thought about the journey, about that moment in the Orpheum when he'd played his mother's lullaby and unknowingly called his sister back to him. About the impossible chain of events that had led him from that church basement to this moment. So many things had to align. He had to survive 20 years of homelessness. He had to end up in Memphis on the coldest night of 2008. Pastor Foster had to be making rounds that specific night. The church basement had to have that piano. Grace had to become a music professor. Grace had to be asked to judge that specific competition. Grace had to be in that panel on that specific night. The odds were astronomical. Impossible, really. And yet it happened. Because of a song. A simple lullaby composed by a struggling jazz singer in a New Orleans shotgun house 4 decades ago. A melody she'd never written down, never recorded, never shared beyond her tiny family. A song that should have died with her. But it didn't die. It lived in Nathaniel's hands, in his memory, in his heart. It survived 20 years of darkness and silence. It waited for the right moment, the right piano, the right night. And when that moment came, it did what love songs have always done. It brought people together. It healed wounds. It turned loss into hope and darkness into light. Can a melody bring back the dead in a way? Yes. Lorraine Hayes lived again every time that lullaby was played. Her love, her hopes, her dreams for her children were all encoded in those notes, preserved like amber, waiting to be discovered. Can 88 piano keys reunite a family torn apart for 3 decades? The Hayes family was proof that they could. Music had been the beacon that led Grace back to her brother, the bridge that spanned 30 years of silence. Can music heard only in darkness shine brighter than any light? Ask anyone who was in the Orpheum Theater that October night. Ask the 50 million people who watched the video and wept. Ask Nathaniel's students finding their voices through vibrations and touch. Ask Grace, who'd spent 20 years searching and found her brother through a song. The answer was yes. To all of it, yes. Nathaniel placed his hands on the piano keys. He played the opening notes of Moonlight Over the Bayou, that familiar melody that had become his signature, his story, his mother's eternal gift. Behind him, Grace entered the room. She didn't say anything, just pulled up a chair and sat beside her brother, listening. Like they'd done 40 years ago in that shotgun house. Like they'd do for the rest of their lives. Because some bonds can't be broken. Some love can't be lost. Some music is eternal. And sometimes when you lose everything, your sight, your family, your dreams, your very identity, you discover that the only thing that truly matters was there all along, waiting in the darkness, preserved in a melody ready to guide you home. Nathaniel finished playing. The last note faded into silence. "Play it again," Grace said softly. Nathaniel smiled. "Always, little sister. Always." His hands found the keys. The melody began again. And somewhere in whatever place the dead go when they're loved and remembered, Lorraine Hayes smiled and hummed along her lullaby, still bringing her children together, still teaching them the lesson she'd taught them 40 years ago. Music isn't just notes on a page. It's not just sound waves in the air. Music is love made audible. It's memory given voice. It's the language we use when ordinary words aren't enough. Music is home. And Nathaniel Hayes, after 30 years of wandering in darkness, had finally found his way there. One note at a time, one melody at a time, one beautiful, impossible moment at a time.